I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. But I just don't care. I don't care. I don't know what I'm doing. And that's okay.
Welcome to the I Didn't Know What the Fuck I Was Doing podcast.
We're your hosts, Teresa
and David.
This is the podcast with two ADHD entrepreneurs who jumped into uncertain territory
and made lots of unpleasant mistakes along the way.
We were able to figure out what we're actually passionate about.
And we are here to help you do the same.
Each week, we will release 2 episodes discussing how we navigate our businesses, relationships, and health,
as well as interview excellent guests who share their own personal IDKWTF stories.
Listen today so you can hear some relatable content
as we normalize uncertainty in business and in life.
Because it's important to admit that no one really knows
what the fuck they're doing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the IDKWTF I Was Doing podcast. I am Teresa Merrick, one of your hosts, and I am super excited to introduce our guest for this 2-part interview. David and I got to interview Randi McCallian. Don't run away when I tell you the topic, because I really want to admit to you that I didn't know what the fuck I was doing when it came to this topic. I even struggled to figure out what questions I wanted to ask. And normally I'm not at a lack for figuring out what I want to know. And I still don't know exactly what I'm doing about this topic, but I used to run away from this topic because it was overwhelming, because I felt jaded, because I felt frustrated, because I felt out of control. And I learned so much about the basics of politics in this podcast. Please don't run away. We don't get into our personal political views a whole ton. It really is more about learning how to make a difference. If you're not happy with something in your community, in your state, in the country, how do you get involved? How do you make a change when it feels overwhelming? So many of those questions are answered. So many little nuances are explained. And I actually feel renewed about what politics is, what government is, and my own personal role in it. So I just ask that you give it a chance, see if you learn anything. Please do tell me. I want to tell you about Randi. So Randi McCallian is running for Congress in Missouri's 8th district, and she hopes to have an impact on the farming community she's a part of. Randi is super passionate about healthcare, children and family issues, affordable housing, and improving living conditions for all that live in rural Missouri. She has prior experience and knowledge of politics. She ran in Colorado Springs, where she used to live, and I really hope that you guys enjoy the next 2 episodes.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the IDKWTF I Was Doing podcast. I'm David B.
And I'm Teresa Merrick. We have a special guest today. We'd like to introduce Randi McCallian.
Whoa.
Hi, Randi.
Hello.
Nice to be here with you.
And so what we'll actually do, we'll put your professional bio in the show notes for any of our listeners who are also watching or on Spotify.
So we'll make sure people know who you are and how to reach you.
Yeah. But if you want, do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of who you are, what you do, and just the quick summary of where you're at right now?
Yeah. So I am a mama too, and I have a background in public health and healthcare improvement. I've worked with families in their homes doing a lot of different jobs. So early Head Start, services for kids and pregnant families. I've worked with kids with autism and their families to help learn how they can best navigate this world that we live in. I've been a birth doula and supported people through childbirth in hospitals as well as home births and birth centers. And so all that to say is that where I've gotten now after all that experience is I've gotten into politics, because what I was seeing and learning in all of those jobs that I had was that the people working at the bottom of the ladder with me knew the answers that families needed. We knew what children needed to thrive. And yet very often it felt like government policy was one of the barriers in the way to thriving. And I also saw that government policy and legislation was the way to improve things for people as well. And slowly but surely just crept out of the field and into politics more and more. And now I am running for Congress in Missouri to use this platform that is provided for us naturally by having a democracy. I can use this platform now to advocate for the things that are important to me, important to family health and community health, and to improve our healthcare system and to make things better for families, children, for our elderly neighbors, and just to generally help people thrive better in a country that should be able to do that.
Nice. Perfect. I love it.
A little more about me is I'm a mom of 2 daughters. I am trying to learn how to run a farm with my husband, and we're building slowly. So for the first time ever, we have chickens, and we built our own coop. And we are cleaning up our forest farm area and taking down dead or diseased trees, and generally just trying to prepare for making and growing more of our food and providing food for the community too.
How much land did you get out there, out of curiosity?
We have 39 acres and we back up to a national forest. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, that's like the perfect amount. I think like a lot of the places are like 5 acres, and I think it's just too small. I think 30 plus is like the perfect size. That's what
I don't know how to measure acres. Land is cool though. It's fun to have a little piece and to have some space and to grow and do what you want. And chickens, if only I lived close, I would buy eggs from you. I love fresh eggs.
Yeah, we've started getting too many and we just hand them out now to friends when I go places.
Yeah. I ran a cattle ranch for a while. I don't know if I told you that. We had, just a bunch of cattle, like a ton of chickens. And so it was a lot of fun.
Where did you do that? In Colorado?
In Colorado, yeah, out past Castle Rock.
That's great. We eventually want some animals that can eat stuff just off the farm, and doing like silvopasture, which is more tree farming sort of thing where you leave the trees in the pastures, and we want those trees for us to be nut and fruit trees so the animals can also just eat that and make life easier on us.
Yeah, nice. Well, so the big reason that I really, really wanted to have you on, and I was like, okay, who do we need to interview? It's Randi McCallian, because you are like the only person, I guess there's one other person from our high school that's gotten into politics. And there's so many people our age that are just hesitant. Like we were raised to not talk about politics, not talk about religion. We're like, hey, don't get involved in that conversation. So what exactly was the catalyst for you that made you want to do this venture?
There's lots of things that contributed to it. And I want to acknowledge a few that I think I had access to that other people didn't necessarily. And one of them is that my mom, for the last 20 or so years, taught U.S. history and government in our public schools in Colorado. And I always knew I had a really smart mom who was exposing me to a lot of great things, but I didn't know until I truly started trying to engage with our government more in my 20s. In my field in maternal and child health in the field I worked in. It wasn't until then that I started realizing I had a lot more confidence about my ability to influence the government, and that it was my government to influence, and that if I wasn't impressed with it, that it was my job to help change it. Mm-hmm. And I know that a lot of those beliefs and understanding of the government came in part from my mom. Mm. But in the field that I choose to work in, and maternal and child health is where my passion lies, I've been very interested in the beginning of life, in prenatal and birth care, in making sure that we do those things the best we can, because then we prevent a lot of problems in the future, not only for the babies and the children growing into adults, but also for our healthcare system and for families, for birthing people. So I just really saw that the early years are extremely important. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in that work, I really noticed that there were barriers in the way. And so one of those barriers, for example, is how often families have to reapply for food stamps. And I've worked with a lot of families with very young children. And in many cases, these families are having to do a lot of paperwork and the back and forth on the phone or having to go into an appointment. We all know how burdensome that is these days for anything you do, right? And so I was really seeing that these families with young children, a lot of times they were moms on their own, but even when they weren't, one of the parents is working at least all the time. And then this parent is trying to get their kids to pediatrician appointments. And they're on the phone all the time about WIC food stamps. And maybe they're on TANF, which is assistance for families who need financial assistance. And so they're having to do all of this stuff to keep those benefits and not having the kind of time to spend on their mental health, to spend with their children, to spend maybe cleaning their house because kids are a disaster all the time. And so I was noticing really that government was a burden in those ways, but also that government is the place to get supports in place. At least we have the food stamps. At least we have the assistance for families who really need it. And so we need government, but we need it to work better for us and not be the barrier to our success. So
I feel like it needs to be simpler too. As a mom of 3, I'm like, my kids are entering into like preteen phase at this point. But when they were little, I think about when I had all 3 of them and my oldest was 5.5. And it was like a 5.5 and a 2.5 and a baby brand new. And you don't have time for anything anyway. So then when you're like, okay, I need this service, you have to make time for that. But yeah, then you already don't have time. So it's like making it simple, making it efficient. Absolutely. And it's confusing. And I think for me as a parent, as a busy human being, like in general, I think there's a lot of things about politics and about any government aid of any kind, no matter where you're looking as a parent, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as whoever, it's confusing. And they put all these systems in place. And I get that. Well, I don't get it, actually. Why? Like, I think it seems like there's this like barrier on purpose to make things harder because, well, if you really want it, if there's a system in place that says you make under this amount to qualify for WIC, for example, then it should just be that simple. Like, you either qualify or you don't qualify.
The government knows how much you make. Why would a mom have to prove every month or 2 months or 3 months that she's not making any more? And you make such a good point about there is no time. And one of my favorite quotes about parenthood that sums it up perfectly to me is that it's not hard to raise children. It's hard to do anything else, including showering, including a phone call,
including eating a hot meal.
Exactly. And so when we require parents to even call in to make a pediatrician appointment versus automatically scheduling them out for you and having a reminder sent to your phone, and why don't we just have nurse visits at home sometimes for families who do have 3 children and are like, I can't even get into the car with my kids without it being an hour and a half of getting ready. Mm-hmm. At that point, something's going to happen right when you get in the car and you're going to be late for the appointment anyway. What if you could sign up for a nurse to show up at your house? And then people would have more access to healthcare, especially in rural areas like ours. Can you imagine driving 45 minutes to a pediatrician appointment for 3 different kids all these different times?
And even then, making a pediatrician appointment, I think still, and I have Kaiser, so a big name health insurance company, I think I can only make appointments for 2 kids at a time, not 3 appointments in a row. Like usually, I think it's partly availability and partly, and because but it's just one of those things that's like, why isn't it easier? I don't care what insurance you have or whether you don't have insurance, to make an appointment for the healthcare of you or your children should be easier. Absolutely.
Agreed. And one of the reasons it's hard, and there's a few, but it really boils down to not enough people who have experienced this side of it are in government. And incumbents, people that have already been in office, they have a very easy time winning their seats again. It's hard for us to get someone who's already been in office out. One of the reasons for that is they can have a lot of money sitting in their bank account. My opponent has $1.5 million in his campaign funds, and he's been in Congress for 9 years. $1.5 million. How is anyone supposed to take that on? Like, seriously.
So I want to ask you a question about that, right? So, because earlier you said it's our government, right? And this is something I think so many millennials especially don't seem to really, really understand. They feel like the government is like a parental figure that's there to take care of them, that they need to do things for. They don't have the mindset of it's our government, they work for us, we pay them, they're supposed to do the things we're asking them to do. And then when they don't do those things we ask them to do, we don't do anything about it. Yeah, we should either get them out or do something else. But like you said, there's no one else to vote for because these long-term politicians have millions of dollars and they keep getting reelected. And even if we don't like them,
They keep winning and we don't have any other options.
so in your experience, because you're going up against a second, like in Colorado Springs, you ran against another long-term politician, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the, other than money, what are some of the challenges to getting your voice in front of the people who want to hear it?
Good question. So right now, and you say other than money, so that's a tough one because a lot of these end up boiling down to money. And so I'm just going to go ahead real quick and speak to that because it's so critical. And I want to talk on something else that you mentioned too. So first with money, something big that I've learned as I've been doing this is a lot of people in our age group and older talk about term limits. And there's a conversation I've been starting to have with people where term limits aren't what's going to do it for us first. First, we need campaign finance reform. First, we need to get the money out of the politics before we term limit people. Because we do have good advocates for us and for the people, Republican or Democrat, good for the people. We do have good advocates in Congress, a couple in the Senate. We don't want to term all of them out before we remove money from politics. Because think about big money in politics. Even if my opponent had been termed out, that money would still exist and they can just pay to put the next one in. Because right now, about 90% of the time, the candidate with the most money wins the election because they get the most ads, they get the most radio space, they get the most TV space because they can afford to literally just buy anything and get it all out there. So then they get the most name recognition, they get the most support because people saw them more. So they believed that they were wanted more. They believed they were the candidate that people wanted because they saw them on their TV or heard them on the radio more or got 17 flyers in the mail from them. And so even if my opponent went out, big corporations could just fund my next opponent because they don't want to see someone like me in there who's going to regulate them. So money out of campaigning, money out of politics is more important right now than term limits.
Do you think there's enough people that exist that are in there that would vote to do that?
So most actions and changes that have happened in this country come from the state level up.
Okay.
So we need to be more engaged in our local politics before we're getting ourselves engaged too much in our federal politics. And I don't mean for anyone to think that that federal's not important. Of course it is. But when you get engaged closer to you first, the issues mean more to you. They impact your daily life more and they feel less overwhelming to learn about. And they don't move quickly sometimes.
Absolutely, because that's what I was thinking is no, it's more real. It's on the ground. You can actually talk to people face to face and it's not this like big, scary Washington, D.C. And I think that, yeah, I agree with everything you said.
You guys are so dead on about how separated from government that our generation feels. And so I think talking with you two who do feel so separated from government is good because you are a better voice for most of our generation than many of the people who've interviewed me because most of the people who interview me are political. So they already know a lot of this.
Okay, cool.
Good, because I'm excited to be able to share these episodes that we make. I think that's one of the issues is as millennials in general, speaking for the people that I've spoken to, no one can figure out where to start, how to make the changes. And I love that you were just like, this is where we need to start. And Dan and I, my husband and I have talked about, I think it's Canada or something that like regulates how much money their presidential candidates have. They have X amount to spend on their campaign and that's it so that everybody can run equally. And so I think it's interesting. That's what you brought up as this is where to start with that. So that, because we've talked about term limits too. And yeah, if they can just dump money into the next person that they want, then it doesn't matter anyway. It's going to be the exact same voices. So
Yeah.
Exactly. They can buy
I'm learning from you, Randy. Thank you.
good. And there are states with campaign finance laws. And so right now, federal level candidates don't have a lot of restrictions in that way. We're able to fundraise a lot more from a PAC, from an individual. Whereas there are a lot of states that have laws that really squish that down. And so again, state level is where those changes really happen. We got gay marriage state level up to federal level. Our abortion rights was state level up to federal level. Cannabis is making a similar trajectory, maybe.
That's just what I was thinking.
I was thinking the same thing when we were talking about it. I'm like, no. And that's the most recent that I see. It's like it was in Colorado, then it was in Colorado and Washington, but now it's in several states and it's just continuing. Real quick, I just want to take a quick little break and then we're going to come back and hear more from Randy. So just hang on, guys. A word from our beautiful sponsors.
Our wonderful sponsors.
This is a podcast for anyone looking to improve their personal, professional, or family life.
We craft these episodes so you can learn from or relate to our experiences and opinions.
And we'd love to hear more about you. So if you're interested in connecting with us further,
as well as other like-minded individuals,
we recommend checking out our creatively named Facebook group, Colorado Entrepreneurs.
You don't have to be from Colorado or be an entrepreneur to join, but it doesn't hurt.
Just go to facebook.com/groups/Colorado Biz, that's BIZ, and send us a join request.
Or check the link in the description and show notes below.
Thanks for listening, and now back to the show.
And welcome back. So you just told us a little bit about how money is such a big factor on who wins or who doesn't win. And then, so the second part to that question, other than money, is there something that like limits you from getting the voice and the opinions that we know probably the majority of people have? They want to hear your voice and they want someone who represents it. And they're the majority, but they're still not able to know who you are, hear your message so that they can vote for you.
So I would say, having had the ability of the break to think about it, that if I'm staying away from money as the barrier, because again, that really comes down to that a lot, because you can buy name recognition with money, right? So then I would say free press. And what I mean, that is a little bit bigger than what some people might think is just like regular press. So the Republican Party and the GOP as a whole, and so my opponent is a Republican, I'm running as a Democrat. The Republican Party and the GOP has done a really good job of messaging and getting their base to spread their message for free for them. Mm-hmm. And you touched on this a little bit. I can't remember if we were already recording or not, but you said that our generation had really been raised not to talk about politics, not to talk about religion. Mm-hmm. And the GOP Republican side of the aisle doesn't really...
They're the opposite.
Exactly. They don't spread that message. They talk about politics. They talk about their religion. Yeah. And so there's that free press, because the side that progressives are running on, the side of democracy, which, as you pointed out, and you are absolutely accurate, the majority of Americans want democratic policy, not conservative libertarian policy. But we on the left-ish progressive Democrat democracy side, we don't spread those messages for free.
We're terrible at organizing and terrible at working together and terrible at knowing what's going on. And it's infuriating, really.
Yeah, it is. But it's interesting just because I had a lot of conversations with Dan, my husband, about this. And we've talked a lot about religion and Christianity and how that specifically aligned with the conservative view. It's like they just intertwined it together. Whether it actually belongs together or not is completely irrelevant. They've just done that. And it's, to me, a way of them getting free marketing and people just to say, oh, well, I only vote Republican. Like,
even if they only agree with one policy on the Republican Party, they're like, I agree with this one issue. I don't agree with these other issues, but I'm staying with my party line because of the party or because of the one issue.
Even if we bring up, and just for anybody listening who doesn't want to hear a big political debate, we're not going to go there. But like, Roe versus Wade is obviously happening. It's happening now. Things are changing in ways that the majority doesn't want. I know plenty of people who are very conservative who still believe that you should have the right to determine your own health care with your doctor. That has nothing to do with anybody else.
I've heard from a lot of Republicans who are upset. Yep.
Yeah. And so to me, it's a humanitarian issue. It's not a you versus me, left versus right, whoever you want to pit against each other. And I think part of it is too, because on the more leftist side, we are like, hey, we want everybody. We love everybody. Black Lives Matter, QIA plus, let's be inclusive. And that's something that, because I'm registered independent personally. However, I tend to lean more left, but that's because I love that inclusive vibe. But then we don't rally around one point because we don't have necessarily one common intersecting point. And so I think it's interesting because how do we come together to do what you're saying and get that free press, that exposure, and share and actually make a difference? And maybe it comes back to what you had said, Randy, about state versus federal, because federal is such a big scale to look at first.
Yeah, a little bit of starting smaller and what's local to you, because then that'll matter in your life. But I want to touch on something that you're both saying, and David's touched on it, and it's a perspective that we need to step away from as millennials.
Okay.
The idea of government taking care of us, and we said that's a part of what we have been raised to think, that's conservative, patriarchal sort of top-down messaging. And I think that's a reason why our generation has pushed government away, is because our generation is more of a co-parent, that progressive lefty style of collaboration as we do things. We work together, but we all have different focuses, and we want to raise our issue and work together on issues. And so we were raised with the messaging from the conservative side, because as we've touched on, that messaging is always happening, whereas Democratic messaging is not always happening. So David, when you said that people choose one issue on the Republican side sometimes, and they just vote because of that, one of the reasons is because they're always hearing Republican messaging. In some ways, they feel like they can trust it because they hear it. Democrats don't talk much about our politics, so we can't be trusted quite as well because we're not setting the language, we're not setting the dialogue, we're not setting our own message. We're allowing the Republican conservative side to set the message for us because they're always messaging. And if we stay politics, then our message isn't in there, so no one knows what we think.
Yeah, I want to make a direct correlation to that, and this is why this Roe versus Wade thing happened, because they set the message of it's about abortion. They said abortion, abortion. Every single conversation, Democrat and Republican, is abortion. If we had changed the messaging to reproductive independence, which is what it is, it's choosing, it's women being able to make medical decisions for themselves and having the privacy to do so. Abortion is just a small part of it, but that was the entire messaging. And that's why it got so inflamed and that there's such a division because of the conservative messaging on this one word.
Everybody is literally talking about the specific abortion.
The one word, which that's not what it's about.
Life begin, which isn't the actual issue. That's the problem with this over. I mean, honestly, I believe that everybody should have that autonomy. I mean, I also thought people should get the COVID vaccine, but also, again, it's not my job to tell you what to do to your body. So it's one of those that's like, it gets very, I feel like that was a huge divide too, because then you've got people pointing fingers at each other. And ultimately, I think no matter what issue we talked about, it really is about one side pointing the finger at the other side and getting nasty. And that just doesn't, you have to bring people together, I feel like, to make change, no matter what that change is.
Yeah, for sure. And with that patriarchal big government outlook, we're not going to want to make it work for us because we're not seeing it as collaborative with us. But really what our government is supposed to be is made up of the people that we've chosen to represent our neighborhoods and our ideas so that we have more power to get those things done. The government should not be like a father figure. The government should be us working together on a team to address the climate crisis, to make sure food is getting throughout the country so that there aren't communities and children going hungry, so that we are doing agriculture better and it's not being run by corporations, but it's being run by the people. And so it really is our government, but we have to change our attitude about what it does. We can't hate the government. It's ours. If we hate it, change it. It's just like if you have a class and you choose a leader for the group project and you have 5 group leaders that go up and tell the class what we're working on, right? That's what our government is. Choose your leaders and help them get in there. And we will have a government that we like, that works for us.
I just thought of, because David and I talk about community a lot. We're like, hey, all the things wrong with our country is community-based. And to me, it's like government should be a vehicle for community to stand up and say, what do we need in our community? What do we want in our community? And it's very interesting for me to have this little like moment. What you just said, Randy, is completely accurate. But I think for me, I've always been intimidated by government, and I've talked to a lot of people that feel helpless about how do we see the changes we want to see.
Yeah.
And so I just think this is such a relevant conversation. And I thank you for being so candid, Randy.
Of course. And it doesn't work for us right now, but that's because we kind of lost control over it. Whether the people really ever had total control of our United States government is arguable, but we've been moving towards that. And it really has just been the last couple decades that we've lost a lot of it and gotten too much money in there and corporate control. And you guys said something earlier, that downward slide of government. And one thing I wanted to share is that this was a planned thing. There was a group of pretty wealthy people that had some power, and they planned to stack the Supreme Court. They made sure that they were hanging out at some of the Ivy Leagues looking for lawyers graduating that were very Christo-fascist, that wanted to control the country under a Christian government. And they planned this. And so as much as it's frustrating right now, we just have to plan and organize, and we can take it right back. But this was planned and organized. And so we shouldn't feel like it was so sudden. They had a plan and they're executing it. But
it's not like they didn't tell us that's what they were doing also.
It's been very obvious.
They told us and then they did it. And we're like, oh, it's so weird.
On a point, I think part of the problem is that even if you thought you knew what was you knew, okay, wait, there's some fishy things going on. Maybe you don't understand exactly what's happening. I think, again, it comes down to not knowing how can I see this thing starting to happen. I see this thing coming in. I don't like it. I don't know what it is. Maybe I need to know more. But it gets so complicated and convoluted. And what news sources do I go to? What do I do as just me alone in my state with no political background I'm not running for anything right now. And so I think, I don't know, what would you say to that, Randy, when we see something that we don't understand and or we're confused by and or we're like, this doesn't feel right? What do we do then before we get to this point that we're at where we're like, this is really bad?
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what people can do and how they can feel engaged without feeling overwhelmed. Before I say that, one thing I want to point out is that all of these, we talked earlier about how many barriers families face, right? The applying for WIC every other month, I think it is, or every 3 months, or just all that stuff. All of that was planned, and it was done on purpose. People who don't want to see the government function well passed laws and made sure that things were passed in the laws to make it hard to get the benefits that we are owed and deserve if we need them in this country. And so making you apply for benefits over and over, that was done on purpose to make it harder for people to get them and to make government suck. And one really important place that this has been happening is in our schools. And so our public schools are amazing, and they used to be phenomenal. But the wealthy people who wanted to see the dissolution of our public schools and education because they want workers who are undereducated that will not fight back. And so they started targeting our public education system about 30 years ago. And all they had to do at first is start pointing a finger and saying, it's not working. And people started turning and going, why not? Why isn't our public system working? And that started the downfall of funding our public system, making classroom sizes bigger. And so we can make all these things better. We just have to decide we want to do it. And so let's talk about how people can do some of that, though, and where to start so that it doesn't seem overwhelming and your politicians aren't at the level of the federal government where they've done this for a long time and it can be intimidating to talk to them.
Yeah, we'll take a break here in a second. But so the message that you're saying is that you do think we can come back and change what's happened.
Oh, completely.
You really think that?
Yes, it'll take some time.
We were
How long?
like a doomsday guy over there. Like, I'm the one who's find the hope, and David's like, everything's sour. And
I personally think it's going to take at least a generation. But again, I'm not involved in this and I don't actually know. What are your thoughts on how long it would take to have more equality in our government?
It depends on how quickly we can mobilize people to believe they can make the change.
Mm-hmm. Is it going to have people like at that state level coming in their local city and state governments? Is that really probably as fast as we can get people in? So when are you running, David?
So here's the thing I was going to, but the way I feel, honestly, is that if I run, I'm not going to get the support because I don't have the money. I have a voice, I have a message, and I know that people agree with me, but they're not going to come vote for me. They're not going to come fight with me. They're not going to, like the conservative Republicans, they have well-funded and well-organized groups that bring each other up. And why would I fight so hard for something that I believe in if I don't have people behind me supporting me, right?
You don't feel like you have people supporting you, David?
If I was running for a political office, I don't think I would have the support that the opposing side would have.
I think you made that up in your brain because if you've never tried, how do you know?
But
David,
go ahead.
Many people love you and are inspired by you and would be ecstatic to see that you were trying to make a difference in our government.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I could make the difference.
Let me challenge you there.
Okay.
So I have basically made it my thing now to run in places that are pretty much nearly impossible for me to win. And the reason I do that is because we have so much more here to gain. Now, let me challenge you. Do you like Bernie Sanders?
I don't like or dislike him.
Do you acknowledge
he's got good policy?
Bernie Sanders didn't win the Democratic nomination in 2016, and yet his race changed the dialogue in this country about healthcare. It really turned out a lot of people who wanted to see healthcare be a social good instead of a privatized for-profit system. And he didn't even win, and we shifted the dialogue in this country. He motivated tons of people to come out and get engaged in politics, and he didn't win. And honestly, he didn't think he was going to win. As much as all of us running think we will at some point, I think he knew that the establishment was going to squash his race and not let him win the nomination. And he ran. If you don't run for a spot, you don't get to use that platform that is built in and available free to us in this system. So if I hadn't run for this seat, my Republican opponent would be the only voice in this whole district again, and there would be no Democratic message. There would be no me setting the message. It would only be him setting the message, and he could say whatever he wants about Democrats, and that is all that people would hear. And instead, I took this seat, I'm running for this seat. I would like to take it. I'm running for this seat, which is a plus 50 Republican district right now. But I have a platform now, and I get to set the dialogue of what a Democrat is in this district. I get to start having people look, and he might call me a socialist, whatever he's going to call me, but people can then go look me up, and they can see who I am and judge it for themselves. And they can meet me, and they'll meet me at their doors, and they'll hear from me on the phone, and they'll see my ads. And I will be talking about families, public health, healthcare access, that our district doesn't have enough food, that 1 in 5 children in our district is hungry, that most of our counties don't have a fully functioning hospital in them. And so he only got to set the message, and I didn't run. then people would think this district was doing pretty good and that it was the Democrats federally that were ruining everything for them. But now that I'm running, people in this district will know that 1 in 5 children in our district are hungry. 1 in 6 families struggle for food. We have the highest poverty rates in Missouri, and we have the highest diabetes rates in Missouri. What is our representative doing for us? He's been in there 9 years. So do you see how there's no counterpoint when someone doesn't?
It allows the people who live there, whether you win or not, it allows the people to then go to him and say,
and ask some of those questions
and say, okay, so what are you doing about because I'm like, hot button issue for me, like hungry kiddos in our country. Oh, it breaks my heart. It just makes me want to cry. And so there's going to be people who live in your district who go, I'm a Republican, I vote conservative, I vote for this guy, but what are you doing for these children and families that are hungry?
Exactly, because he's not going to share that 1 in 5 kids is hungry in our agricultural district with a representative who calls himself a farmer. And so if I don't share that message with my trusted platform, then the Republicans don't know to challenge him, just like you just said.
Yeah. So getting your voice out there, whether you win or not, as you just pointed out, because I don't know a voting American in the last 10 years who doesn't know anything about Bernie Sanders at all. Whether they liked him or not is neither here nor there. We know who Bernie Sanders is, and we know he has impacted things in the country. Even if we can't get super specific, we're like, oh no, like people listened to him.
Yeah.
People liked a different perspective that he was bringing. And I think that's where a lot of his followers came from, was like, whoa, something just totally
when he challenged the system. And if we don't have someone who's not happy stand up and say their challenge to the system, then the challenge goes unsaid. Then the status quo continues. In my district, which is 28 counties, if I wasn't here using this platform for that messaging, then it wouldn't exist, and you would only know what they put out. And then no one would challenge my opponent, which makes it an autocracy, not a democracy.
So true. Okay. Yeah. Well, it is time for us to end part 1 with Randy, but we're going to do part 2. And I feel like I've learned so much already.
Yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful. So I think in part 2, we'll talk maybe some more specifics on if someone's interested in, if not running, at least getting more involved and seeing what they can do to make some actual real changes in their community and our country, really. Let's talk about some specifics and hear maybe some stories about the things that have worked well for you and some of the troubles that you've had while going through all the steps to get to where you are today. Sounds like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Awesome. All right. Cool. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. This has been part 1 of our 2-part series on this topic.
The second episode will be out this coming Thursday, if it's not out already.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider liking, subscribing, and or reviewing us on wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Also, if there's someone you know who clearly doesn't know what the fuck they're doing and would benefit from this topic, please hit that share button and send them this episode.
Let's normalize the feeling of uncertainty,
asking for help, and admitting that we don't know
what the fuck we're doing either.